He may tell himself that time has passed. He may convince his mind that he has moved on, that your name no longer echoes in his inner rooms. And yet, somewhere beneath his logic, something remains unsettled. Because what you left behind was not noise. It was not drama. It was not dependency. It was a mark. Not the kind that screams for attention, but the kind that reorganizes the inner landscape long after the encounter ends. And this is precisely why he can't forget you, even when he genuinely tries. You see, most connections pass through a man's life like weather. Pleasant, temporary, replaceable. But you didn't pass through him. You entered where he wasn't conscious yet. As Carl Jung wrote, nothing has a stronger psychological influence on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. In Jung's view, what remains unresolved inside a person does not disappear. It seeks form, reflection, and recognition. And that is what you became. You didn't just offer affection. You activated something unfinished inside him. A question he had avoided. A depth he sensed but never explored. A version of himself that only surfaced in your presence. This is why forgetting you is not a matter of willpower. Because forgetting you would require him to forget who he was when he was with you. And that version of himself felt real. With you, he wasn't performing. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't hiding behind certainty or detachment. He was exposed, not through conflict, but through resonance. You mirrored him back to himself without trying to fix him. You reflected his potential without demanding he live up to it. And this is far more destabilizing than rejection. Jung would say that when we encounter someone who touches our unconscious, the psyche reacts as if it has met fate. Not romance, not attachment, fate. Because the unconscious does not forget what awakened it. That is why even silence doesn't erase you. Distance doesn't neutralize you. New faces don't replace you. You are not remembered as a person. You are remembered as a state of being. And states imprint deeper than stories. This is only the beginning. He may decide to forget you, but the psyche does not obey decisions the way the ego expects it to. Because what tied him to you was never purely emotional, it was somatic. It lived in the body, in sensation, in rhythm. That's why he can distract himself, stay busy, surround himself with new people, and still feel a sudden tightness in his chest for no obvious reason. A pause before sleep. A restlessness that appears out of nowhere. This isn't nostalgia. It's memory stored below thought. In Jung's view, when a connection reaches the unconscious, it bypasses rational closure. The mind may say, it's over, but the body says, something is unfinished. You didn't just speak to him. You changed his internal tempo. With you, his nervous system learned a different pace. A way of breathing, listening, softening. And once the body learns a pattern of depth, it resists returning to emotional flatness. That's why casual connections feel empty afterward. Why conversations feel thinner. Why laughter feels slightly off. He's not comparing them to you. He's comparing them to how he felt in himself when you were there. And this is where the real imprint forms. You didn't chase him. You didn't collapse into him. You didn't try to be unforgettable. You were present. And presence rewires. Jung spoke of something called the complex, an emotionally charged nucleus in the psyche that forms around meaningful encounters. Once activated, it doesn't disappear. It waits. So when he hears a certain tone of voice, when a woman looks at him with genuine attention, when silence feels intimate instead of awkward, that complex stirs. Not because he wants you back, but because the psyche remembers depth. And depth, once tasted, becomes a reference point. This is why forgetting you feels like losing access to a part of himself. Not pain, disorientation. He doesn't miss you as a person. He misses the inner coherence he briefly touched. And that is far harder to replace. You didn't leave an emotional wound. You left an awakening. And awakenings don't fade quietly. What confuses him most is when you return. Not when he's lonely. Not when things fall apart, but when life seems stable again. That's when you surface, in the middle of an ordinary day, in a moment of calm, in a silence that suddenly feels incomplete. This is because the emotional mark you left was not created in chaos. It was created in clarity. With you, he didn't escape himself. He recognized himself. And recognition imprints deeper than pleasure. Jung believed that the psyche is oriented toward wholeness, even when the ego resists it. So when a person encounters someone who reflects a truer version of themselves, the psyche registers it as meaningful, regardless of whether the relationship continues. That's why he doesn't remember you as a fantasy. He remembers you as alignment. And alignment becomes a silent standard. Every time he feels slightly off with someone new, every time connection feels forced, every time laughter doesn't reach his chest, you are not the comparison. The standard is. He senses it without naming it. This is also why he can't fully resent you, even if things ended painfully, even if distance was necessary, because you didn't take something from him. You revealed something. And once revealed, it can't be unseen. He may try to rationalize it. Call it timing, circumstance, incompatibility. But beneath that explanation lives a quieter truth. With you, he felt more himself than he was prepared to sustain. And that creates a very specific ache. Not longing, not regret, but the awareness that something real was touched, and then set aside before it was fully lived. Jung would say that what is not lived consciously is lived unconsciously, through repetition, restlessness, or quiet dissatisfaction. That's why you return in his thoughts not as desire, but as a pause, a subtle question his life keeps asking. Why did this feel different? And that question follows him, not loudly, not dramatically, but faithfully, because the emotional mark you left wasn't about romance. It was about truth, and truth has a way of resurfacing, especially when someone believes they've already moved on. What lingers inside him is not sadness. It's pressure, a subtle internal tension that appears when life asks him to be shallow again, when routines become mechanical, when conversations skim the surface. Because with you, something inside him expanded, and expansion cannot comfortably return to compression. This is the part few people understand. He doesn't feel your absence as emptiness. He feels it as a contrast. Before you, emotional neutrality felt normal. After you, it feels insufficient. That's why he becomes restless in places he once tolerated. Why he suddenly needs more stimulation, more distraction, more noise. Not because he's chasing pleasure, but because stillness now reminds him of depth. In Jung's view, once the psyche encounters an archetypal experience, something that resonates with the self, it recalibrates its internal compass. What once felt enough quietly loses its authority. And you represented an archetypal mirror, not the ideal woman, but the truthful one. You didn't overwhelm him with intensity. You didn't demand transformation. You simply existed without fragmentation. And that's what destabilized him. Because fragmentation survives only in environments where no one reflects wholeness back to it. So when you left, he didn't feel abandoned. He felt exposed. Exposed to the fact that he had touched something real and chosen familiarity instead. That awareness doesn't scream. It hums. It shows up as irritability, as subtle dissatisfaction, as the sense that something is always slightly unfinished. This is why he doesn't romanticize you loudly, why he rarely speaks your name. The psyche protects itself from what it isn't ready to integrate, and you represent a version of himself he hasn't yet claimed. As Carl Jung would say, what we avoid consciously becomes a quiet force that shapes our choices unconsciously. That force is now active. So even when he believes he has moved on, even when life appears full again, your imprint remains, not as memory, but as pressure toward becoming. And pressure like that doesn't disappear. It waits. At some point, he genuinely tries to substitute the feeling. New conversations, new attention, new beginnings that promise lightness without depth. And for a while, it works, but only on the surface. Because what you gave him was not a role that someone else can step into. It was an experience of himself. And experiences don't transfer. He may meet women who are beautiful, kind, intelligent, and still feel an invisible distance inside himself. Not because they lack something, but because he does. With you, he didn't have to split himself into acceptable parts. He didn't have to suppress nuance. He didn't have to stay armored. And now, every interaction that requires him to shrink feels subtly exhausting. This is why replacement never truly satisfies him. It only postpones the confrontation. Jung believed that once the psyche touches the self, even briefly, it becomes impossible to fully identify with the mask again. The persona still functions, but something inside knows it's incomplete. You were not his mask. You were the moment it loosened. So when he laughs too easily now, when intimacy feels rehearsed, when connection feels transactional, the unconscious registers the difference. And it doesn't blame the new person. It turns inward. That's why his attempts to forget you often come with unease. Why enjoyment feels diluted. Why satisfaction never quite settles. He isn't missing you. He's missing the permission he felt around you. To be real without explanation. And that permission changed him. Even if he never admits it. Even if he never reaches out. The psyche remembers what felt authentic. And authenticity, once experienced, becomes a silent requirement. That's the emotional mark you left behind. Not longing, not attachment, but a standard his soul quietly refuses to lower. Tom was supposed to dull it. That's what he believed. He assumed that distance would soften the edges, that memory would blur, that you would eventually dissolve into something from the past. But time didn't erase you. It refined you. Because time doesn't remove what was real. It removes what was illusion. And what remains after time passes is always the truth of the experience. With you, there was no distortion to peel away. That's why, as months pass, you don't feel farther. You feel clearer, less emotional, less charged, more precise. You become a quiet reference point inside him. Not a fantasy, not a regret, but a recognition. He remembers how he spoke slower with you. How he listened instead of anticipating. How silence didn't threaten him. And this is what unsettles him most. Because now he sees that forgetting you would require him to return to a version of himself that feels incomplete. Jung believed that the psyche matures not by accumulation, but by integration. What we fail to integrate doesn't vanish. It waits until we are ready. And you are waiting inside him not as a desire, but as a question. Why did I feel more whole then? This is why he doesn't rush to contact you. And why he also doesn't fully close the door. Because some doors aren't meant to be reopened. They're meant to change who you are. You are no longer an option in his life. You are a marker. A line between before and after. Before you, emotional efficiency. After you, emotional awareness. And awareness is irreversible. That's why even when he believes he's moved on, even when life appears full, something in him still pauses. Not to return to you, but to measure how far he's come. From the man he was, when he felt most real. And that is why he can't forget you. Not because he wants you back, but because you altered his inner map. And maps, once redrawn, never return to their original shape. There is a moment, subtle, almost imperceptible, when a man stands at the edge of becoming someone new. Not because he planned it, but because life quietly demands it. And that is when you return, not as memory, not as longing, but as signal. He notices it when he's about to make a decision that requires honesty, when he's tired of repeating himself, when something in him no longer accepts emotional shortcuts. That's when your presence reemerges, because you are linked not to who he was, but to who he almost became. Jung spoke about the psyche's tendency to summon symbolic figures during moments of inner transition. Not people as they were, but people as meaning carriers. You carry meaning, not romance, not nostalgia, meaning. With you, he glimpsed a version of himself that operated with more integrity, more awareness, more emotional gravity. And every time life asks him to step closer to that version again, your imprint activates. This is why he sometimes feels unsettled for no obvious reason. Why certain choices feel heavier now. Why he can no longer fully lie to himself. You are connected to his threshold moments. Moments when growth becomes unavoidable. And growth is uncomfortable because it requires relinquishing familiar patterns, old defenses, inherited beliefs about who he is allowed to be. So instead of thinking about you directly, he thinks around you. He feels you in questions like, why doesn't this satisfy me anymore? Why do I feel disconnected from myself? Why does everything shallow feel loud now? You are not the answer. You are the context, and context shapes everything. That is why forgetting you would require him to abandon the direction his psyche is moving toward. And the psyche rarely retreats once it has tasted alignment. So he carries you forward, not consciously, not romantically, but structurally, as a quiet internal reminder that something more honest is possible. And once a man knows that, even vaguely, he cannot unknow it. That is why you remain, not behind him, but ahead, marking the path his soul is still learning how to walk. What changed was not his attachment to you. It was his tolerance for unconscious living. Before you, he could drift, react, avoid depth without consequence. After you, something inside him refuses that ease. Because you didn't awaken desire. You awakened awareness. And awareness is irreversible. Jung spoke of individuation as the quiet, often painful process of becoming who one truly is, rather than who one was conditioned to be. And the most unsettling encounters, in Jung's view, are those that accelerate this process before the ego is ready. You were such an encounter. You didn't arrive to stay. You arrived to initiate. And initiation never asks permission. This is why he cannot fully relax into old patterns anymore. Why emotional shortcuts feel hollow. Why detachment no longer feels like strength. Because detachment once protected him from feeling. Now it feels like self-betrayal. You didn't make him emotional. You made him honest. And honesty is dangerous to a life built on avoidance. That's why he may resist the memory of you. Why he may avoid places, songs, even certain thoughts. Not because they hurt, but because they remind him of who he could no longer pretend not to be. You became a quiet rupture in his narrative. The moment when his old identity stopped fitting comfortably. And once an identity cracks, it doesn't reseal. This is why forgetting you would require something far more drastic than time. It would require regression, a conscious decision to become smaller again. And the psyche rarely allows that once growth has begun. So instead, he adapts. He recalibrates his desires, his standards, his tolerance for emptiness. He may never name you. He may never return. But he carries forward a subtle shift in gravity. Because you didn't take a place in his life. You changed the direction of it. And that is why, no matter how far he goes, no matter how convincingly he moves on, something in him always knows. Before you, unconsciousness. After you, no return. At a certain stage, something subtle happens inside him. He stops thinking about you and starts measuring himself against what he felt when he was with you. Not consciously, not deliberately, but in moments of choice. When he's about to settle, when he's tempted to accept less depth for more comfort, when he tells himself, this is fine, that's when the internal friction appears. Because fine no longer feels honest. You became a calibration point, not because you were perfect, but because the connection was unedited. With you, he didn't negotiate his truth. He didn't dilute his responses. He didn't live on autopilot. And now, anything that requires him to numb himself stands out sharply. Jung spoke of the psyche's innate drive toward truth, even when the ego resists it. Once the psyche recognizes a more authentic alignment, it quietly rejects substitutes. That's what's happening. You are not haunting him. You are orienting him, like a compass he didn't ask for, but can unfeel. This is why he sometimes feels uneasy even in objectively good situations. Why something always asks for more sincerity, more depth, more presence. You didn't make him want you. You made him want truth. And truth is demanding. It doesn't allow emotional shortcuts. It doesn't tolerate half-lived lives. It doesn't disappear when ignored. So he carries you not as memory, but as a silent internal question. Am I being real right now? That question didn't exist before you. And questions like that don't fade. They mature. They shape decisions. They filter people. They reorganize values. You are no longer part of his emotional story. You are part of his psychological structure. And structures don't forget their foundation. That is why, even when he thinks you're gone, even when he believes he has moved on, something in him still pauses, checks, listens. Because once truth enters a man's inner world, it doesn't ask to stay. It simply stays. What remains now is not emotion. It is recognition. At the deepest level, he understands something he may never say out loud. Meeting you was not about love. It was about awakening. You arrived at a precise psychological moment, when his old inner structure could no longer contain who he was becoming. And you didn't push. You didn't demand. You didn't insist. You simply were. And that was enough. As Carl Jung would say, the most transformative encounters are not those that comfort the ego, but those that confront the self. You confronted him without confrontation. You showed him a depth he could reach, and a courage he had not yet claimed. That is why forgetting you would require something impossible. To pretend that encounter never mattered. To deny the moment he briefly touched his own truth. And the psyche does not forgive that kind of denial. So instead, he carries you forward. Not as longing, not as regret, not as memory, but as evidence. Evidence that something more real exists. Evidence that he is capable of depth. Evidence that life can feel different when lived consciously. You are no longer part of his past. You are part of his inner awakening. And awakenings don't fade. They don't dissolve. They don't disappear with time. They become the quiet force that reshapes a life from within. That is the emotional mark you left behind. And that is why, even when he tries, he can't forget you.